Welcome to the SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time we're going to talk about what are the activation options of your SharePoint Framework extensions to the SharePoint site. So technically, how do I get my SharePoint Framework extensions available within my sites? What are my options? How do I do that automatically, potentially in tenant-wide, and so to say, and we'll have obviously live demos for all of these options in this webcast. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me is Waldek asking the hard questions within this webcast. Right, Waldek?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody.
And do you want to do a quick intros as well? So.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Waldek Mastikas. I am a product owner at Rancor, also Office Development MVP, and today we will talk about activation options for SharePoint Framework extensions.
Excellent. Thank you, Waldek. If somebody don't know who's Waldek, so it's good to always clarify that one. Now, so let's actually start this discussion with a one classic slide, which we actually had in a previously recorded webcast. And this is a good discussion slide, a good, let's say, option slide to come in, let's say, start discussing these options. So first of all, when you create your SharePoint Framework solution, as part of the Yeoman flow, or after the Yeoman flow, you can configure this in the solution package JSON file. We're asking, or you need to make a decision: is that solution tenant scoped or not? And this is a really important question, because if it is not tenant scoped solution, you will need to explicitly install that solution to the site before any of the components, the extensions or web parts, are available within a site to take advantage or to be used. If it is a tenant scoped option, this actually gives you the opportunity of having your web parts automatically available in the web part picker in the site. But because there is no extension picker in the site level for administrator or for end users, which makes a lot of sense, the extensions are technically available, but they're not actually activated, so they're not visible in the site. So that means that there's always an additional step which you need to perform for getting the extension visible in the site level. Does it make sense?
So what? Yeah, yes, but the one thing I wanted to ask, right? So when I build something, how would I know whether that's tenant scoped or whether that should be tenant scoped or not?
Fair question. Obviously, you as a solution architect or a solution designer or the developer, you need to make that decision. So are you building, for example, let's say a specific application or a solution which is, how would I put it? It's a one self-contained solution which is meant to be installed one by one to the sites where it's actually being used. So you don't want to have your web parts available across the tenant. That would be a design decision to then make sure that you're packaging everything to a non-tenant scope solution. So somebody explicitly installed the package to their site, and then they get additional components and capabilities available. But if you're, for example, creating a web part which you want to have available for all of the sites, then you absolutely choose the tenant scope option. So it is a design decision which you as a developer need to do. Okay,
and is there also another dependency? Imagine that I create a web part and the web part needs, let's say, a list.
That's so that's a good, let's say, way of thinking that as well. So if you have a web part or an extension which has a dependency on a custom list schema, as an example, or a custom list with a specific schema, then as part of the deployment, you want to have that list created to the site automatically using administrative permission. So some account which has the permission to create the list to the site. That would actually drive you to the direction of the packaging everything to a single solution and not to use the tenant scoped option, rather use the site scoped option. Because as part of that option, you can do a feature framework based configuration for the site in the elevated mode. And the elevated mode means is kind of needed, because if you could obviously have a web part which creates the list for you whenever the web part is being used. But what if the end user doesn't have permissions to create a list? There is no way to elevate, because we're basically talking about JavaScript here, if that made sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Excellent. And the fact that it makes sense for you, Waldek, doesn't mean though that it makes sense for anybody else who's listening. No, just.
And thank you on that.
Yes. So activation options. So let's talk about slightly these options. So this comes down on the it's kind of it's highly dependent on the previous slide as well. So how do we actually make SharePoint Framework extension available in a site level? So we have 3 different options, and the third option was introduced in the build 2018. So basically May 2018 forward, it was announced. We're going to talk about that one today. But if you watch this webcast immediately when this webcast goes live, that option is not yet available for you. So that's coming slightly later. I'll come back on that one in a second. Now, the local activation is the first option. And this basically means that the solution is deployed to that catalog. But it's not tenant scoped deployed. So you basically are, the solution is getting activated when you install that explicitly to a site. So somebody needs to go and install the solution to the site level. You can use ALM APIs to make that step happen. And then as part of that activation, if there's any feature framework definitions or property configurations, all of those are getting applied in the site scope. Which also means that all of the instances of this one, let's say that you have multiple sites, if you activate that solution in all 3 sites, all of those 3 sites by default have exactly the same configuration, because you create the list, potentially the list which the extension might have a dependency, and then the client-side component properties would be set in the way as it is in the feature framework definition. And which basically means that because the feature framework definition is the setting the client-side component properties, the parameterization technically is exactly the same for all of the sites. You can technically go and modify the parameterization afterwards, but it's not really typical thing to happen. The second option is then the on-demand activation. And this is a terminology which we're actually, by the way, introducing in this webcast. But the on-demand activation basically means that your solution is deployed to the app catalog and activated in a tenant scope. So inside of your package solution JSON file, you have configured your solution via tenant scope available in a tenant scope. So that means that there's no site-specific installation. So if a person goes to add an app functionality in a site, your solution is not visible to be installed at the site level. So all of the web parts, like in the previous slide, all of the web parts are automatically available in all of the sites which are part of that package, or they are available in a web part picker. But extensions will need to be explicitly activated, so they're getting rendered on a right location, because there's no, again, extension picker in a site level. And that activation happens then using either APIs or REST APIs or CSAM APIs, or using PowerShell, like PnP PowerShell or Office 365 CLI in the site level. So you basically go and add a user custom action entry in site collection or in site level, and that will then tie in which extensions going to be rendered either in a list or in the application or in the site level. And when we're recording this, we already announced this that this is coming, but it hasn't been yet available. So there will be a site script action support for this one sooner or later. And what it means is that if you're using the native out-of-the-box site provisioning, site collection provisioning from the SharePoint home, or you're using the site scripts using the PowerShell, you're able to activate the extension on demand in the site collection as part of that provisioning process, or when you're applying a site script to the site. Long explanation, but again, Waldek, any questions before we move to the
so for this, just to clarify.
In this webcast. No, never.
Next. So the one thing I wanted to clarify is that, or to ask if that's indeed the case, right? So here, if you choose tenant-wide deployment and activation of your extensions and web parts, that means that if there is dependency to a list or a field content type, that will not be available on the site. So if that's the case, you will always need to use it in combination with provisioning piece that will make these lists and artifacts, fields, content types available on the sites where you want to use the web parts and extensions, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, exactly. That's really a good way of putting that. So if there's any dependencies on a web part, you will have to have then, for example, remote provisioning techniques applied to the site, or a site script action, which will then create the list with the dependent schema for the site for the extension of web part. That's a really good way of putting it.
Okay, cool. So what is the new option? What was announced at Build?
What is the latest option? Depending, obviously, well, it might be that there's even new options after this one. Potentially not, because I think after this third one, we're well covered. Always depends.
Never say never. Never say never.
Exactly. So the third option, which we announced in 2018 Build, is a global activation. And this is it's in quotes because, well, it's a global activation, no doubt, and you're able to control this globally in the tenant level. It's in quotes because we didn't want to use the term tenant activation because that overlaps with the tenant scoped deployment. So that's why it's actually in quotes. But what this means is that this is supported for tenant scoped solutions. So your solution has to be first the tenant scoped. And when that's true, you're able to use this global activation. And this is a list, technically it's a list in the application app catalog, where you can target extension to be activated automatically, for example, in all of your modern sites without provisioning things one by one. So you're able to go to the list and say, hey, dear SharePoint, whenever a user goes to a group associated team site, so the modern team site or a communication site, include this application customizer to be rendered as part of that site. So you have this global control and you're able to modify that anytime. So you can always go to the list and modify which are the extensions and their instantiation, which is getting rendered as part of these modern sites. Or you can choose which are the extensions for which site types. And like noted already, this is supported only obviously for modern sites, like other extensions as well, because the modern sites or the modern experiences, I would be more specific on that one. So you can actually have a classic theme site which has the modern experiences, and you're able to use the global activation for them as well. This you're able to support filtering. You're able to do filtering of the extension in the site template or in a list template level. So you're able to, for example, say that, hey, this contextual menu button or toolbar button in the list view command set is visible in all of my document libraries in my tenant, or it's targeted to be visible only in a custom lists in my tenant. Or you're able to say, for example, that this application placeholder extension or folder extension would be available in all of the communication sites, as an example. Questions, Walde? Me rambling and trying to explain.
So in a way, if I think about the on-demand activation and global one, in a way that they are the same with regards to that they do not provision any artifacts that you might need, right? So correct. From that regard, you still need to ensure that they are there. But the biggest benefit to the latest option, the one that allows you to globally activate or enable your extensions, is the fact that it works on both new and existing sites. Yes. Which is really great if you want to build something new to extend your portal and then have it enabled consistently across the whole intranet, all sites of given type, or just all sites experiences.
Yes.
And you want to do it consistently across the board, because otherwise you would need PowerShell script that iterates through all of them, and then also ensure that every single time there is a new created site, you would either need to extend your site design with the site script when that's available, or provisioning wise your template, whatever then it is, to also activate it. With this option, that's already out of the way and it's always on, the way you say it consistently across the board, right?
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, you don't have to, as an example, something before this option, you were forced to reassociate or reapply or add a new user custom action entry, for example, for footer and header for all of your sites. And what if you have 100,000 sites? That's going to take a while to actually process. With this one, you have a global control on what extensions will be visible from a one centralized location, and that's brilliant. That's absolutely, I really like this functionality. Well, I've been part of the team who's designed the functionality, but and actually be one of the PMs responsible of this one. So I'm super proud of getting this one shipped.
And I think that one important thing to keep in mind is that while you can so when you create the entry to enable the extension across the board, you can specify parameters, right? So in that way, it's parameterizable.
Yes.
You can parameterize it.
Yes.
But the same parameters will be used on all sites, right? Because you enable it for all experiences, for all lists, for all sites, right? So the same parameters will be used across the board, right? So it's a pro and a con.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because in a way it limits you,
yep.
But on the other hand, it gives you consistency across the board.
Absolutely. So, and there is even obviously after the global activation support being available, there's absolutely still a role and a demand for on-demand activation and also the site scoped or local activation as well. So having these three options will then cover pretty much, well, I can come up with a scenario which would not be covered, but we're covering all of the different scenarios. How would I get my SharePoint Framework extension available? Do I want to have it globally available on all of the site? Check. Do I want it available only for a certain division or a certain set of sites? For example, using a site design which is targeted for a HR people, and then HR people are seeing that, they create a site and then they will have an extension. That's check on the on-demand action. And there's multiple options on that one as well. Or if you want to have an end-user driven, I want to install this solution from the app catalog to my site and then we'll activate certain things. That's the local activation option covered as well. So all of these do have a use scenario or a scenario where they are needed. But having all of those three will then give the needed flexibility for deployment, which is really cool.
Cool. So with that, how about we see it in practice?
Let's actually have a look on that one. So let's do a quick demo. Move back on the slides for close-up and then just summarize what we've been doing. Okay, so let's have a look on the different options in practice. And let's start with the local activation. And local activation meant that we are installing an application to the site explicitly and activating that to be available from an extension perspective. So in this site, this is a just newly created site, which was just created for the webcast purposes. Brilliant that we can actually create these slides sites so fast. So I'm going to actually go here. I'm in the classic experience. Let's go actually to the modern experience just as well. So now we're in the modern experience and we'll go new and add a web app, not web, an app. And in my case, I have the local deploy client-side solution available from the app catalog. So I already installed that solution to be available in the app catalog within this tenant. So let me click that one. And that's going to then start installing that add-in or app, in this case, well, technically SharePoint Framework solution to the site. The reason why I was actually in the classic experience is that if you want to kind of follow up on what's the latest status and confirmed the installation, you can always move between the classic and modern experience in, well, clicking this one in here. But in this case, the installation was quite fast, and we can actually see a header and a footer getting installed on the site. And the header is saying that it is locally deployed extension, and footer is saying that it's locally deployed extension. So this extension was activated to the site because we explicitly installed this solution to the site. And obviously it doesn't matter where you are within the site, that the extension is getting rendered. And in this case, it is also following up on the theming rendering in certain levels. So that's why the coloring changes are happening. Now, let me actually go back on the solution and let's have a look on what actually happened. So this is a relatively simple SharePoint Framework extension following up pretty closely on our tutorials. So we wanted to keep it that simple because the experience isn't really the key point. It's around how do we get it deployed to the site level. And how do we do that is by default, when we selected this solution not to be tenant scoped and having an extension, the SharePoint Yeoman template actually generated this element XML file. And the element XML file was generated with a custom action entry and with the right client-side component ID. So this client-side component ID is basically referring to the manifest ID of the extension. So if I go in this manifest JSON file, there's my ID, which is actually the same ID which we're adding in the elements XML file. Like you can see, the numbers are matching. What this technically means in practice is that whenever this solution is getting installed to the site, we activate a feature feature framework feature, and as part of that feature framework feature, we execute this custom action activation, which adds a user custom action to the SB Web user custom action collection with a specific ID and the definition. And the title is being local deployed. So we can actually see that one in practice. So let me actually go to a PowerShell. And let's actually connect, let me go to that site. I'm going to take the URL from here. I'm going to use, let me slightly bump up the font so you can more easily see what I'm doing here. So in my case, I'm using Commander also as my PowerShell tool. If you're wondering what is this tool, what I'm actually using, it's just a matter of a preference. You could use PowerShell console, PowerShell console as such as well. What we have is that we're using the PnP PowerShell. So I'm going to do connect PnP online is the right term, and let's actually use the URL and paste in the URL on there. In my case, I've configured my credential manager with the connection details, so it's not actually prompting me the ID and the password. It's just something what can be done with the PnP PowerShell. But now if I do a get PnP custom action, we can actually see what are the custom actions within the webcast site. And this is the custom action which was actually added to the site. So we're in the webcast site, we're in the webcast site over there. We do get PnP custom action, and we can see that there's a one entry available within the site. So, and that entry was created there whenever we executed that feature XML, which is part of the solution which got installed to the site. Makes sense, Waldek, right?
Absolutely.
So let's have a look on the second option. The second option we talked about was the tenant scope deployed extension. And what that means is that the solution itself is already deployed to my tenant. So let's have a look on quickly the solution and then figure out how do we get this activated to the site. So this is my tenant deploy solution. And this is actually looking exactly the same as the local scope solution, except that it's explicitly saying that I'm a tenant deployed extension. So we can actually see it in the UI that this is now coming from the tenant deploy solution. So this solution has been already installed to the tenant. You can see that there's no feature XMLs available, and we control the tenant scope deployment option in the package solution JSON. So this one here is saying skipped feature deployment equals true, which basically means that it's a tenant scope deployment. Somebody might be at this point, well, that you should be asking, why did we name that attribute like that? And the answer is, well, fair question. It's a mistake in the spec planning. It should have been more like a tenant scope deployment true and false, but it is now skipped feature deployment, which basically means the tenant scope true or false handling. If it's tenant scope, you do skip the feature deployment, so it kind of makes sense, but anyway, slightly confusing. Good. So it's a skipped feature deployment. Tenant scope equals true. So it's a tenant scope which is available within the tenant. The solution is kind of available, or the components in the solution are available within all of the sites automatically. The thing is, if it's a web part, it has a web part picker. The web part picker will then serve also the web parts from this kind of solution. Extensions do not, however, have an extension picker, because there's no such thing as an extension picker in a site level. And it actually doesn't really make sense to introduce that kind of functionality. So we need to explicitly go to the site level and somehow activate the extension to be available. The easiest way to do that, well, there's multiple ways of doing that. So we can use REST CSAM, PnP PowerShell, or Office 365 CLI. And it's a matter of a preference again, how do you activate this? Or pretty soon when we're recording this video, after we record this video, there will be available site script action, which will, so you're able to activate the extension in the site level as part of the site design, which is getting applied to the site, or site script to be precise, but again. But how do we get, in this case, this to be available? So I'm going to use PnP PowerShell. It's just the easiest way to make that happen. And I'm going to use the add PnP custom action. And I'm going to use a few different switches on this one. So I'm going to use, first of all, let's give it a name. So let's call this tenant deployed. If I remember correctly, we need to, not like that. We need to also provide a title. So I'm going to actually use the same term, if I remember correctly, the PnP PowerShell just requires both name and a title. The dependency that this can be used for numerous different other purposes as well. The location has to be also set. So let's do a location. And we need to set the location the same as with this local scope. So I'm going to actually copy the location from here, because that's precisely the value of what we need to add for this one as well.
And in case you don't have it there, where else could you get the location from?
Obviously, you can get that entry from our documentation. That's one way of doing that. Or you can always go back on if you have a solution which is locally deployed. So let me actually activate that one from there. You can actually see the location in here. So we generate this one for you automatically if it's locally deployed option. But documentation, okay. Absolutely a good part as well. Or alternatively, you can always go to the our, for example, PnP PowerShell documentation. I think we do we have an sample on this one. If we don't, we apparently don't have. So we should absolutely improve this documentation to have an example of this one as well. But all of the things what we're using here are documented. If you're using Office 365 CLI, that's really well documented. If it's a PnP PowerShell, it's documented as well. And in our official documentation, all of these tags and everything else are being mentioned.
Cool.
We have name, title, location. What's missing? Well, the ID.
Client-side component ID.
Excellent. So the client-side component ID, and this is basically telling them to SharePoint that, well, on this site, when somebody is using this site, let's also render this client-side component ID as part of the site rendering. And in this case, it is a application customizer with the placeholders in use. So we can actually then see some changes in the UI. So let me go to the tenant deployed solution. I'm going to open up the manifest file. I'm going to take that needed ID from here. Solution has been already deployed to the tenant app catalog. So the same ID is existing in a tenant app catalog. That one here.
And the one more thing you miss is the URL just before you run the command and it fails.
What?
The URL of the site where you want to add it to.
No, actually, Waldek, we are already in the site.
Because you are connected to the site. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. So that's the difference.
That is needed.
Yes.
Indeed. Because
fair enough.
In the context of the site, we no longer need to explicitly set the URL. Again, slightly depends on what technique you're using. So Office 365 CLI requires you to set the URL.
Yeah.
Right.
And do you need to include the scope for the custom action? Because the one that we set above was added to web.
Yes, that's a fair point. So I could have also used, first of all, there's a client-side component. I already executed this, but there's a client-side component properties option. So we're able to parameterize this instance. So giving different parameters, and that could change the behavior of the extension. The second thing is also that there's a scope option, which basically supports web/site. There is a default value for this one, so we don't actually explicitly need to do that because the default value is web. So in our case, we didn't actually do that because we executed the previous line already. And let's go to the site. Just going to remove that. There we go. So we executed that line, added a PnP added PnP custom action. It added a new entry. So now if we go to the get PnP custom action, we can actually see two entries in here. So you can see the second entry, which was just added, and the local scoped entry there as well. So let me go to the site. Let's go to the site. Let's go to the, for example, in here, and let's do a refresh. And we can actually see that we have two different extensions.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Awesome UI design, isn't it? So
toolbars, more toolbars.
Yes. So in this case, more toolbars. We have a header for tenant scope extension, and we also have then the header from a locally deployed extension. So we have two of these headers, one from a locally activated, one which is tenant scoped activated. And obviously, if I uninstall the local scoped, then only this fellow is removed, not being rendered, and all of that. So they are completely independent configurations in a site level. Make sense?
Totally.
Excellent.
So now the question is, how do we get third one?
How do we get the third one? Well, we're not going to use this particular tenant for the third one. First of all, the site would start looking pretty horrible. And the second of all, actually, this functionality is not yet rolled out. So this is preview functionality. The recording is happening pretty soon after the build announcement. So we're going to use the same tenant as we used within the build. So this is still in test environment or test tenant, which we're going to use for showing this up. Now, how we do this is that in the app catalog, as part of the new functionalities and new announcements in the app catalog site, so let me show you that this is app catalog site. This is an app catalog site where we have certain add-ins already installed on the tenant level. So in this site, we actually add a new list. And in this case, it's not yet visible in the site contents. It will be visible in the site contents. We just decided actually to 1 business day ago that we'll add it in the site contents. So you can easily access the list, and you as an administrator, you can actually configure this manually as well. Now, we will support adding this entry here automatically as well, directly from the SPPKG file. And potentially at some point, we might have a central admin UI for configuring these options in a more, let's say, end-user friendly way as well. But the basic functionality, what we're saying here, is that you have a list. We're able to configure what is the component ID, what are the properties for that instance. Let me actually click the new item so I can actually show this one in practice. What are the options? So we basically say, what is the component ID? Basically, what is the manifest ID, which is getting rendered. We're able to parameterize that instance if needed. We're able to filter this extension to be only activated in certain web templates. And what's important here is that it's not just the modern group associated team side and a communication side, it's around the experience. So it could be also a classic team side, but in the modern experience, and stuff is getting rendered properly. Or we are able to filter based on a list template. So this is for list view web or list view comment sets. So if you have a button and you want to add a button, custom button for all of your document libraries in your tenant, you can easily do that using this tool. Then we need to define the location. In our case, it was the application customizer location, which we added on the previous setups as well. And then the sequence means that if you have multiple extensions, what is the order of those extensions getting rendered? So the sequence could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it could be 100, 200, 300, and so on. So you're able to define what's the order of the extensions. In my case, what I did here, I actually have an entry already available here, but the location for now is wrong. So the location is something which we don't support. So let's go to a site and we can see the site without the extension. So I'm going to go to a normal group associated team site. There's no extensions in this team site, no nothing, so nothing special as such. So nothing fancy getting rendered at this point. So let's actually go to tenant-wide extensions, and I want to modify this existing entry. And I'm going to make sure that my location entry is correct. So it's client-side extension.application customizer, and stop editing the list. And what this now basically meant that in all of my sites, in the modern experiences in my tenant, we will include this extension to be rendered with the component ID of this one. So I need to have a SPPKG file or solution in my app catalog matching this, with a component matching this component ID, and with these particular configurations. So these are solution-specific configurations. In our case, we're using this for defining what is the term store and what is a user profile property, which this extension will use. And how's the user interface? So let's go to the site. Let's request the group, or request the site again. We're able to see that immediately when I added that entry to the site, our extension is getting rendered in the site as well. So in this case, the site, there we go. And let's actually do a Control F5. So really making sure
it's cache, right? It's cache, yeah.
Yeah. So this one is from a developer tenant or a eDoc tenant. So let's see if we can actually make this happen. What a great demo, actually.
It worked 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, it did. Settings are fine, everything is fine, that's fine as well. Let's get in here. Let's actually open up this one, or maybe we potentially need to cut a section from the webcast recording. Here we go, now it actually renders properly. So I went to a communication site. If I go to group site, it probably is now rendering properly. There was a small delay. Oh, it is actually delay on getting the JavaScript file served. There we go. So the extension is now getting rendered. If I scroll down, you are able to see this extension footer here, which is saying contacts, legal policies, and tools. And this is a set of links which are getting controlled by the tenant administrator or the tenant person. So somebody is able to introduce, let's say, a static set of links for all of the end users within this tenant. Makes sense? Quite a typical actually scenario what customers want to have. But then this actually has this edit my links functionality as well. So if I click this one, we get this nice UI where we can actually add additional links to this for this persona. So let me add here search www.bing.com. So that's my favorite search engine. And let's add here my company. Probably doesn't make sense, but I'm going to add here www.microsoft.com, and let's add here tool. HTTP www. What would be my tool? Good URLs. Give me an example.
spcaf.com.
That's a wrinkle. No. Good point. You tried. Good try. Doesn't matter. We're going to use www.sharepoint.com. It's probably registered by, of course, how am I? AMS, SP, PnP, or SharePoint community pages. How did I miss that one? Okay, 3 links which are configured by me as a personalized links, and I'm going to save this. And you're going to see a nice screen message saying link successfully saved. And what's actually have a new selection of column available or a menu available. If I click my links here, I can actually see those links which are just configured to be available for me as a persona within this tenant. So the extension itself is pretty cool as well. So if I go to communication side, refresh, we can absolutely see that the personal extensions or personal links to be visible here as well. But this is really good example of a globally activated extension. It's an extension which you want to get rendered in all of my sites in this tenant, because the function for this functionality, it makes sense that I have all of these links in across all of my sites, across all of the tenant. Right.
Cool.
And really, maybe one thing to note on here, if I want, I can absolutely go and modify and add multiple instances of the same extension or remove this extension, and the changes are immediate. So this is not like something is then scanning through all of the sites one by one and activating this one in there. No. It is a runtime activation. So when we're rendering the site, we go to that list and double check do we have entries in there. So the changes which you apply are absolutely immediate. But that's pretty cool, and I think it's a good demo on showing what the global extensions and global activation is all about.
Absolutely.
Let's move back on the slides and do a quick summary and close up the webcast. Excellent. So that's it. Quite actually big demo covering all of those 3 options, and hopefully you're able to follow up on the advantages and disadvantages of all of the options. But basically, now that after Build 2018, we introduced the global activation option. It might be already available for you, might not, slightly depending on when you're watching the video. Now it's going to be available in summer 2018 timeframe, roughly. So no exact dates, but we will definitely announce that properly. But having these 3 options available, you can now target your extension to be easily available based on your business requirements, and that's really the key here. And it also provides flexibility for administrators, so we're able to decide how and when these extensions are available, or developers or architects, whatever is the role within your company making that decision. Anything I want to add here, Waldek?
I would actually underline what you say is that it gives you another option, and it's important for you to understand that these options are there, when to use which one, what are the what will be the consequence of using each option, and to incorporate that in the process of designing your intranet.
Yes.
Right? Because just the fact that that the options are there doesn't mean that each option applies to each case, right? So it's important for you to understand when to use which one and to use them accordingly, because that will give you the best results.
Absolutely, absolutely. And typical, quite often people come and ask around, okay, so but which of these options, these three options, is the best option? And the answer is, well, all of them. It really depends on your business scenario. For all of them, they have a specific use case. It really depends on how do you want your stuff to get deployed and how are you planning your solution to get deployed. So there's no black and white statement which of them is the best, because there's no such thing as best, because best for one thing isn't the best for another thing, which makes a lot of sense. Cool. I think that's it for this one. So thank you for watching. Thank you, Waldek, for joining and asking the, in quotes, hard question. You need to actually pay attention on asking hard questions, Waldek. So more difficult question.
Okay. How hard is it to use them? Is it a hard question?
Fair point. Fair point. Okay. I think that's it. But thank you, everybody, for watching. Thanks to Waldek for joining me on this one. And we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you.
Bye.